I started this compost pile pretty much as soon as we got out here to the property. Before we'd done any real landscaping or setting up of our home, I knew our gardens were going to be centrally important to what we were doing here. The compost that I'm creating here is not for the gardens that I'm immediately creating. That's going to take some time. But what I ideally wanted was some material that was going to be ready to go on our gardens in time for spring. We want to plant a whole heap of things into our garden system, and compost is going to be critically important to that. Now, as you know, compost is basically just the breaking down of organic material into a medium that your plants can grow in, or actually more accurately, into a medium that's going to feed the soil that your plants are growing in. But this compost pile has stalled. What do I mean by that? Well, I can stick my hand right inside this pile and it is no different in temperature to the outside air. I should not be able to get my hand very far into an active compost pile. If you've ever made compost before, you know they are baking hot on the inside. And that is because all that microbial activity that's happening on the inside generates a ton of heat. The other reason I know is because this material is not getting any more refined. It's not breaking down and becoming smaller in particle size. And so there's nothing happening. There's no life inside this pile. So I've got 4 ways for you to regenerate life back into a compost pile when you've got a pile like this that's stalled. And all you've got to remember are the 4 things that every living organism needs: air, food, water, and shelter. I reckon we've probably got 1 or 2 of those things out of balance. Even though it's winter and we're experiencing some colder temperatures, we don't get a snowy winter here. We barely even get any frosts. I should be able to keep a compost pile going throughout winter, albeit a little bit slowly. I should be able to keep some heat in this pile. So we're going to step through the process of bringing all of those things back into balance. Okay, the first thing we're going to work on is the air or oxygen that's getting to the microorganisms inside this pile that are doing all the hard work. Now, as that pile begins to break down, the material collapses closer and closer together to the point where the oxygen can't flow throughout the pile. The process of turning the pile basically fluffs that pile up so that air can move throughout it. That's why you get those tumbler systems that are basically used to just shuffle the material around and keep oxygen gaps on the inside of the pile. We're going to do that with a composting fork today. So this is a proper composting fork. It's got 10 tines. You can use a normal garden fork. They're okay. This one's just a little bit better at picking up that mulchy type material. Oh, hey, little pumpkin plant. You always get these in compost piles. If you eat pumpkins, especially this variety, this will be a Kent. We eat Kent pumpkin. Even though our pumpkins have gone through the chicken coop, the seeds always find their way into the compost pile and they love these growing conditions. I'm probably going to leave this guy, to be honest, because I want pumpkins. Actually, there's a tomato growing right beside him. Look, with any luck, I'm not going to need to plant any seeds this spring at all. Well, as I've flipped through these compost piles, I have confirmed my suspicions, and that is that our second element is out of balance. And I kind of suspected this would be the case because I created this compost pile. And that element is food, what your compost needs to feed on and survive. And when it comes to feeding a compost pile, think of it as a ratio of green and brown. Now, you can get complicated, you can get scientific about it, and it's very controversial. You can jump online, there'll be all sorts of arguments you can participate in. I like to keep it simple. 50-50 is what I'm going for. Now, I know my compost pile here is too brown, and that's probably why it's stalled. There may have been some life in it, but I needed to get that ratio in balance. So I have discovered, as I knew I would, heaps of wood chip mulch that went through our wood chipper, a ton of straw that's come out of the bottom of our chicken coop, and lots of leaf litter that we've gathered as we've been doing landscaping activities. I know there was some green waste in here, things like food scraps, things like a little bit of chicken manure and some grass clippings, but by far not enough. So I want to bring that green ratio up higher. In terms of thinking about what's brown and what's green, brown is anything that's basically carbonaceous. It's been dead for a long time. So your twigs, your sticks, your branches, your bark, your leaf litter, wood chip mulch, straw, all of that stuff. It's been on the ground for a while. There's really no life left in it. You need that brown material or that carbon material in your pile. In terms of what's green, it's anything that was recently alive. So if you're pruning, which you'll be doing a lot of at this time of the year, then all of that pruning material can go in as green material. All the leaves and fine branches can go in there as green material. Lawn clippings are absolutely green if they're going in the first day or 2 after being cut. Animal manure is a great one. I love to use a lot of animal manure in my compost. We don't have cows yet on our homestead. We've got chickens, and that's a start, but a big part of my compost pile has always been cow manure. If you've got access to cows yourself, that's brilliant, but sometimes you might need to bring material in. I'm a huge fan of not importing material onto your landscape and trying to keep it as home base as possible when it comes to the material you're creating on your land. But if you have to, then think carefully about what you're bringing onto your land. You can go to your landscape supplier and buy ready-made compost to go straight on your garden. I don't like doing that because in my experience, 9 times out of 10, you're bringing weed seeds onto your property. And I know on this property, there are certain weeds that I don't have here that I definitely don't want. So I don't want to bring compost material onto the property. But what I've had to do is bring cow manure in. And so what we've done is we've found a landscape supplier that provides screened cow manure. That is rotted down cow manure that's been through a refining process that pulls all of those weed seeds out of it. So I'm 99.9% sure I'm not adding in any seeds that I don't want on this property. So this is rotted screened cow manure. So I'm just throwing it in on top. And I'm going to keep about half of it aside because we want to really nicely blend this manure throughout the pile. Now, you know it's been well rotted down if you can grab a hold of what you know is supposed to be cow manure. Take a big, huge smell of it, and it smells nothing like cow manure. In fact, that smells like a forest floor. All right, to the recipe, we're going to layer in some chicken manure. Now, like I said, this has come straight out of our chicken coop, so it's not just pure chicken manure. I wish I was able to collect it that way, but we use a natural flooring system in our chicken coop. So we add wood chip mulch and straw to the base of our chicken coop. The chickens are pooping in that, as well as anything that they're not eating in terms of food scraps. It's all going into this and blending in. So I just need to bear in mind that this is not a pure green material because it does have wood chip mulch and straw in it. But that high nitrogen chicken manure is going to get infused into that compost pile as well, and that is really rich stuff. You definitely don't want to be putting chicken manure straight on your gardens. It's a little bit too high in nitrogen and can really hurt your plants, but going into your compost pile this way, working its way throughout that compost material and then being spread onto your gardens, you'll have no problems. In fact, your plants will love it. All right, these grass clippings are an excellent source of green material. I know they might look a little bit brown in color, but that's just the stage or the life cycle stage that this grass is in. Have a look around the property. We've got tons and tons of these native grass species all over the property. Now, obviously we're not cutting it all, but part of our homestead setup is clearing some spots for us to live in, some other spots for our livestock to occupy. And in doing some of that landscaping work or that clearing work, we've created all of this. I could leave it on the ground. It would be an excellent source of mulch if I cut it where it lay. So if I was doing that for a livestock space, I'd probably just leave it there. But where this came from is just a little lawn space that we're creating right out the front of our tiny home. And so we raked this up into a pile and it's going to go straight into this compost. I reckon by the time I add all of this, we'll have probably doubled the size of the piles, and I reckon we're getting pretty close to our 50-50 ratio that we're after. You want to be real careful about adding grass clippings or lawn clippings into your compost pile. It's an excellent source of green material, but it has the tendency to mat together. Now, we use it like that on purpose. I'll take some of this stuff and add it directly to the top of our garden beds. As long as it's got no seed heads in it, it forms a wonderful natural weed mat on top of my garden beds because it will compact together and form this barrier. That's a problem when it comes to your compost pile because as it gets wet, as it compresses together, it can form a barrier to oxygen. So by all means, add grass clippings into your compost pile, but make sure you blend it again. Just give it one more tumble with that compost fork. Ingredient number 3 in your perfect compost recipe is water. So air, food, water, shelter. So we want to keep this system nice and damp, but not so damp that we don't allow oxygen into the system. So here's my preferred method. I love these dome sprinklers. They're really cheap, and all you got to do is set them up on top of the compost pile and give it a good soaking. That's had a really good soaking. So I know it's really wet on the outside, but I know as soon as I start to dig into the middle of it, we're going to find that it's quite dry. So we're going to get these piles flipped one more time, and then we're going to get the soaker hose on it one more time, and then we'll get to covering it up. Alrighty, those piles have been flipped and reintegrated. They've had another good soaking. They're ready to go. One little tip, something I discovered with that cow manure was that material was so fine, it started binding and clumping together. Now, I didn't want it to form impenetrable layers to air and water. And so in order to integrate it nicely and evenly into the compost pile, we simply layered it in. We added in a bit of the existing material, a little bit of that cow manure, and so on and so forth. And that way it blended into the pile nicely. On to the final step, and that is shelter or warmth. Okay, a cover for your compost pile is pretty important. In your warmer months, you want to cover your pile because you want to keep that moisture in the pile and stop it evaporating out. So I've just been using a tarp up until now, and I've even been using it with the dark side up, and in that way it's just attracting a little bit of heat into the pile. It's worked reasonably well, but as we've discovered, my compost pile has stalled, so I want to incorporate even more heat into the pile. And as we move into the cooler months, keeping heat in the pile is going to be what's important. So I'm swapping the tarp out for some black builder's plastic. You can get this stuff from any hardware store. Now, I know you might be thinking, doesn't the heat come from the pile? Yes, you're right. The microbes and the life inside the pile is what generates all that heat. But because it's life inside the pile, it needs heat and warmth as well. So in order to encourage that microbial activity to multiply within the pile, and we want to add heat into the system to begin with. It's a little bit chicken and egg. We're going with chicken. And that's it. I've added some rocks to the plastic just to stop it blowing away in the wind. Now, like any good recipe, all that's left to do is wait and watch it cook. Hey, thanks for watching the video right through to the end. I hope you liked it. Give it a thumbs up if you did. We're only just starting out on our homesteading journey, and this YouTube channel is brand new. So you could do us a favor by subscribing to the channel and sharing the video with your friends and family. But more importantly, get down into that comment section where I'll be waiting for your questions and comments. Anything to do with off-grid living, sustainability, homesteading in general. But more importantly, let me know what you want to see more of.